What did you think about the fear in the community that there's a killer on the loose?
Well, the fear from inside the department was not felt because some people felt that they knew who the murderers were.
Do you notice former police officer Gretchen Smith uses a plural there? Once again, this is a reference to more than one, to multiple perpetrators.
I think there was not a killer on the loose, or not some random killer roaming the neighborhood looking for little girls. This was a one-of-a-kind.
So that must have been pretty frustrating to see what was reported in the media about a killer being on the loose.
I think the media was led to believe that. There were other voices speaking to the media.
Who was that?
There was the DA's office.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science from a very stormy South Africa. So just to be clear, Boulder PD thought their work was being undermined by the DA's office, in the sense that the DA's office was leaking stories about an intruder, and an intruder being on the loose. And that makes sense because the DA's office also undermined the grand jury investigation and the grand jury's true bills. Not only one DA, but the DA that came after Hunter as well. And if Alex Hunter tacitly exonerated the Ramseys, the District Attorney, Mary Lacey, finished the job by explicitly exonerating them and even apologizing to them. And that arrogation from Lacey carried a lot of weight. It still does. By the way, do you guys know what arrogation means? Maybe we should just put on screen the definition, the dictionary definition of arrogation. In contemporary news reports, such as John's most recent interview on CNN, you'll hear reporters saying this as if it's the bottom line in terms of the ultimate legal milestone. And it is.
Because for years, they were the suspects, until being formally cleared and apologized to in 2008.
The news media just seemed to never go to the trouble to find out the circumstances of how DA Mary Lacey drew her inferences and whether they were drawn soundly and reasonably. And probably the media don't want to do that, certainly not now. Maybe it does take some rocket science to figure out this case, especially if you look at the Carnes order, which found scientific and legal rationale in favor of the intruder theory. I did a whole series on the Carnes order. There's a whole playlist dedicated to that, which was a ruling made in favor of the Ramseys by Judge Julie Carnes, following an unsuccessful defamation lawsuit made by Chris Wolf. And that was authored essentially by, or ruled on by, Judge Julie Carnes. You can see a couple of headlines from the LA Times: Judge dismisses suit against Ramseys, Judge tosses suit in JonBenet Ramsey case. We should perhaps deal with the Carnes order in more detail, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, because I want to come back to this very overlooked witness, this officer that you almost never hear about, Gretchen Smith. Gretchen Smith was Boulder's Police Officer of the Year in 1996, quite an attractive officer as well. And she has some very interesting things to say, especially about what the police believed and how the DA's office kept shooting them in the foot. But before we get to that, kudos to Dr. M. Dryman for leaving this review on Christmas Star just yesterday. 5 stars, couldn't put this book down. This is a review for Christmas Star. I highly recommend this book. Christmas Star is a well-written and fascinating volume on the sad and still disturbing case of JonBenet Ramsey's death. Once I started reading, I couldn't put it down and finished it in a day. By the way, I wrote this book with that in mind. It's a 10-chapter book. All the chapters are relatively short. It's meant to grip you and allow you to read the book really at one sitting. And it is chock full of insights and a narrative that really flows and is supposed to kind of keep you hooked from the beginning to the end. Dr. Dryman goes on to say, Christmas Star offers a perspective on the case that I had never considered before, and I feel that now I have a much better understanding of the case. So thank you, Dr. Dryman, for that. That really was the one goal I set for myself when I swallowed hard and set about covering the Ramsey case, hoping I could contribute something of value. Can I offer a different perspective, not simply pick a side and endlessly bleat about who I think did it, not a narrative of blame or belonging to this or that camp, but actually trying to provide genuine understanding and insight into what really happened in this case. And in Christmas Star, that different perspective does, I think, really start to crystallize, although I do think it's there materializing from the very first book as well. I mean, the bicycle narrative, that was a different perspective. The pageantry, that was a different perspective. The weather surrounding the Ramsey home, the movement of the sun, the snow, all of that, that was a narrative. The child psychology perspective was pretty unique too. The financial narrative, the cancer perspective, the aftermath, in terms of the legal cases as well, and so on. Speaking of being open to different perspectives, I want to draw your attention to a group that don't seem to be, that aren't open to different perspectives. And in that respect, I want to mention a comment I noticed on Reddit. Some people seem to think I make commentary just off the top of my head when literally everything is sourced. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Simply sourcing images can take half a day sometimes, if not longer. It's work, hours and hours of work. And these sources are really my only protection against getting sued, because at the end of the day, it's not my words, it's theirs. I'm simply highlighting and repeating them and providing context. Look at this comment from Reddit. TCRS says that Patsy was flirting away out of answering the question. Excuse me, what? Just dripping with sarcasm, right? Those words, I apparently put somewhere are actually Detective Steve Thomas's words, quoted by Lawrence Schiller in his book. Here's the quote. Patsy was shown a photo of the flashlight that had been found on the kitchen counter. And going down a couple of lines, Thomas felt that Patsy was not only being coy and charming, but even flirtatious. That was Detective Steve Thomas's feeling about how Patsy was responding to these series of questions, as quoted in a book by Lawrence Schiller.
I'm sure you already knew that. That's what turns me on about you. Your attention to detail.
Now, please don't accuse me of being thin-skinned. I really don't mind if facts are criticized, especially if I do get them wrong, and I'm sure maybe I do from time to time. But don't criticize me for facts that I get right. Aren't we all on the same side? Are we trying to find out what really happened in this case? Now, if you can indulge me for a second, I have to say I studied law for several years. Why? Because I genuinely care about the law, about truth, and about justice. And yes, about this case. I've written a lot of books too in an effort that was a combination of doing something I cared about and also to try to make a living in a country with one of the highest unemployment rates on earth. Just have a look at this graphic and go all the way to the bottom, and what do you see? And these are 2015 figures. The unemployment rate now, updated, is 32.1%. That's almost a third of people. Almost 1 out of every 3 people in South Africa is unemployed. And you'll see on these forums people complaining about how tedious they find me, how frustrating it is to see me promoting my books, and how inappropriate it is to be encouraging people to show their appreciation for my videos. There's absolutely no acknowledgement of how hard I'm working, how much time and effort goes into this effort. No one else is promoting my book, so do you mind if I do? Do you mind if I promote my own work on my own channel? Is that all right? It's really sad to see how many people following this case who apparently care about this little girl, who apparently care about justice in Boulder. They are so careless and so disingenuous when you see them in this blame game and undermining game. I welcome people that are whatever in competition with me or other investigators, as long as it's getting us closer to finding the truth. I don't want to ridicule them or undermine them. Many of these people seem to care less about this case and more about how this case reflects on a particular sense of themselves. In other words, it's a kind of selfish voyeurism, an echo chamber where the center of the universe is always themselves. No wonder you can't abide anyone else offering something as harmless but also existentially threatening as a different perspective. Phew, well, now that I've gotten that off my chest, if you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get going.
Even though that may not have been the attitude of what was actually going on in the case.
And it's at this point that the CBS documentary shows footage of Alex Hunter making his remarks.
You will see the justice is served in this case, and that you pay for what you did.
The JonBenet case destroyed morale completely.
Really?
There was no morale. You know, when you're a police officer, you want to work with the district attorney's office. You should be partners in your job.
Because
we weren't at all. The goal is to find the bad guy and put him behind bars.
What do you think was the basis behind it?
Now think of those words from Alex Hunter. We will see that justice is served in this case. Was justice served in this case? We will see that you pay in this case. Did anybody pay? And we know that morale was destroyed sufficiently that a police officer handed in his badge and he was reduced to tears. And I think what Clemente means here is what was the basis behind the shadow that was clouding the case, frustrating the case, undermining the case? What was causing this, to put it simply, this injustice, this arrogation of power?
Well, the parents of the child, they had money.
You notice how slowly the ex-officer is speaking and how carefully she's choosing her words. Now, what I want to do here is rewind. Let's rewind and simplify what's being suggested here. Why wasn't the Ramsey case prosecuted? Money. Anything else?
District Attorney's Office and some of administration did not want to hear that an affluent member of the community was guilty of a crime like this. They didn't want to hear that.
They didn't want to hear that, and guess what? Nobody did. I mean, nobody got to hear this case. The case was never heard other than by the grand jury, and that file has been locked away and the key thrown away. And Smith then concludes with a bombshell. Let's have another boom sound.
I don't think they wanted to solve this crime.
You know, in terms of this whole idea of a different perspective, I think many of us think about the Ramsey case and we sort of feel, why isn't it going in the direction we want it to go, and this and that, and what needs to be done, and various different approaches. What I think many of us don't think about is whether the case is exactly where it's meant to be. Where the case is exactly what has happened to the case is exactly where it is by design. And it may not be the outcome that you want, but it's absolutely the outcome that somebody else wants. And then Officer Smith adds the following.
And if they had to go down a different path that might not have been the truth, I think they were willing to do that.
So to be clear, I don't think, quote unquote, they wanted to solve this crime either. And I think the O.J. Simpson case showed two things: that you could get away with murder, and that you could get away with injustice. And guess what? They were right, because they did. They have, whoever they is. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.